drill. They herded them into trenches, dug by the men themselves. Then, without a word, they poured gasoline into the pits, lit torches, and threw them in. Flames roared, men screamed. Some tried to climb out, only to be shot, stabbed, burned alive. It was a massacre in the most literal sense. But 11 men made it out, through sewers, tunnels, brush, and ocean. Wounded, terrified, half-naked, they found their way to Filipino guerrillas, who hid them until they could be rescued by Allied forces. The survivors weren't just lucky. They were determined to make sure the world knew. Their eyewitness accounts were horrifying, but undeniable. And after the war ended, those stories helped trigger one of the most significant war crimes trials in the Pacific Theater. The perpetrators of the Palawan Massacre were tracked down, arrested, and put on trial during the Yokohama War Crimes Tribunals from 1946 to 1949. Among those tried, Lieutenant General Seiichi Terada, commander of Japanese forces in the Philippines, Captain Kojima Kunio, the officer in charge of the camp. The court heard testimony of prisoners screaming as they burned, of guards laughing as they fired rifles at wounded men crawling out of the flames. The verdicts were swift. Several Japanese officers were found guilty of murder, torture, and violations of international law. Many were sentenced to hanging or firing squad. Others received life sentences in prison. It was one of the few times that POW atrocities committed against Americans were persecuted with full accountability. Justice wasn't perfect, but it was real. And yet, for decades, almost no one talked about Palawan. There were no movies, no textbooks, just 11 survivors, and the burden of remembering. In 2009, a memorial was finally erected in Palawan, a stone marker with the names of the men who never made it out of the trenches. Visitors to the site can now walk the same ground where it happened. They can read the names, and they can feel the silence that hangs in the air, a silence once shattered by fire and screams. These men weren't generals. They didn't lead battalions. They were cooks, mechanics, clerks, just ordinary soldiers trying to survive an extraordinary hell. But because they endured, because 11 of them lived to speak, the truth wasn't buried in ash. Not all heroes die in battle. Some are taken in shadows and remembered in the light. Drop a comment to honor those lost in Palawan. Share this video and subscribe to our channels for more stories where silence is broken and truth has a voice.